Dr. Zachary Marschall, PhD, and he represents Campus Reform. He is the editor-in-chief. Dr. Marschall has a lot to talk about. Zachary, look, there's a lot of things going on our college campuses today. We've seen a rise and an uptick, if you will, of anti-Semitism going on. And we see the media at large covering those particular events that have fueled more anti-Semitic behavior, not only on college campuses, but throughout America. We're talking about the pro-Palestinian marches, and in some cases, which was a shock to many people, in the wake of October 7th, 2023 attacks on the people living in the kibbutzes in Israel and the peace festival that was going on then at that time. We saw people actually protesting against Israel in favor of Hamas. That should not be forgotten. What is fueling this anti-Semitic behavior?
Well, anti-Semitism is the world's oldest hatred. People have been hating Jews as long as we Jews have been around. So there's always going to be a reason why we are scapegoated in this world. Second of all, for 2 generations now, professors and higher education officials have been indoctrinating and brainwashing students to hate Israel and champion the Hamas or PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization platform, because it's seen as the best way to achieve the global revolution that these leftists want. So, you know, a lot of young people, whether they're in college now or recent graduates, are really going out there and championing Hamas and these terrorists who want to kill Jews, because they see that as the quickest way to ensure the arrival of their utopia. It's a form of left-wing politics that has no basis in morality or reality.
You know, Zachary, you call it left-wing politics, but what you just unpacked in your definition or description of what's unfolding on college campuses kind of reminds me of some of the interviews I've had with Iranian Christians who have been operating in Iran and outside of Iran, and they've talked about the same scenario where on college campuses or as young as the age of kindergarten through the 12th grade, they basically have been teaching hate Jews, hate America, hate Israel. Am I getting this wrong, or am I hearing some of the same or seeing some of the same practices creeping into the United States?
No, you're absolutely right, and there's a lot of overlap there. With the case with Iran is a little different than what we're seeing on college campuses, because there's a geopolitical and component there and proximity geographically between Iran and Israel. So there's a sort of circumstances there that don't always apply to the kind of hatred we're seeing on campus. But I have to say, though, that one of the greatest champions of Israel in the United States is the Persian community and the descendants of the people who fled Iran before the revolution. They're the ones with Israeli flags in the streets. The people, though, who have the Hamas flags or chanting Intifada or death to Jews, they're the ones who are also, you know, marching against capitalism, marching against Western civilization, throwing paint on paintings in museums that we see happening in Europe and this country as well. These are anti-Western, anti-American radicals. So they bring a branch of anti-American and anti-Western politics to the table that the Iranian Christians you're talking about don't necessarily have.
You know, Zachary, the media, what role does it play in reporting these kinds of episodes of discrimination and prejudice and just hateful behavior?
Higher education as a sector and an industry in this country is a source of major employment. A lot of the universities in small college towns are the area's largest employer, and this is especially true at state universities. So the media has a responsibility to hold any large institution like that in our country accountable with scrutiny and with transparency. They're not doing that. They've pretty much lost interest in this issue since we had those congressional hearings with Claudine Gay and Liz McGill that ended in their resignations. That the national media made the mistake of treating those hearings as the finale of this news cycle. It's not a news cycle, it's omnipresent, and nothing's really changing. We're seeing professors at Columbia University and CUNY this week saying how much discrimination they're facing personally and how the situation is deteriorating still for Jewish students and faculty. The only media really covering this issue right now are the local outlets, but those stories are not being picked up by the major networks, by the major cable stations. So there's a responsibility for these stations to stay on the story and not try to pass off this issue as being resolved.
Where is the hope for Jewish students? And for that matter, where is the hope for students who feel like that they've been maligned and marginalized because they're Black, Latino, Muslim, what have you? You talked about being spat upon. I can recall, I'm old enough to remember seeing Black students go through that, and even myself being called the N-word in high school. So I get it, Zachary. I understand the plight that so many Jewish students are feeling right now and living in fear of even getting their education.
I think the way forward is to find a way for the nation to understand what anti-Semitism is and how it operates when it comes from the left, as we're seeing on college campuses. Every example I'm talking about, and this entire trend is generated by people on the far left. It operates as a form of racism, but it is not cut and dry. So the experience you endured with racism, that is something that's easier to see because of, we're able to see Black and white people as different races.
I get it.
There's different colors. Yep. It's very easy visually to understand how that happens. A lot of American Jews are white. Not all of us are white, but a lot of are. So a lot of what is done against Jews in this country is dismissed as trivial, or it's dismissed as something that isn't racism, because people only have one definition or one understanding of what racist discrimination looks like. So I don't see hope and I don't see a way forward without a paradigm shift happening in the minds of the general public about what it's like to discriminate against Jews. Not every form of discrimination involves the Ku Klux Klan and shootings at synagogues. There is more to it than just what is happening. Those two examples, the left likes to trump out every single time. They want to deflect what is happening on their side. I'm aware that I come off as pessimistic, and I'm aware that a lot of what I relay doesn't contain a lot of hope, but I think it's also important to be realistic, and anti-Semitism has been around for millennia. So it is a long game with fighting it, and it's going to persist in one way or another, unfortunately, I think. So the best way to do it is to, in the near term, be able to make the stakeholders in higher education recognize it for what it actually is, and enforce the policies and procedures that are already on the books so that Jewish students can attend campus and know they're safe with the same protections any Black or Latino student would know are there for them if they encountered someone who is racist against them.
And that, my friend, actually does spell action, hopeful action. So I would disagree with you about being pessimistic. I think you're more honest and transparent and putting a lot of in-your-face honesty before the American people about what's happening on our college campuses with our young people, Generation Z. And Generation Z is usually a growing community that says we want to get along and be together. And yet, what's happening on our college campuses is someone's pulling the strings here, Zachary. Someone's doing a flim-flam bamboozle on the American student population. Why?
There's been an anti-Israel bias on the far left for decades now in this country, and to understand what's happening now, you kind of have to go back about 40 or 50 years to look at the shift in what types of professors and administrators are being hired in the academy once the scale tipped from mostly liberal to mostly leftist. Those people who then form a majority of the people who are in charge of hiring, firing, and promoting only hired, fired, promoted, and trained people like themselves. So we have a vicious cycle happening in higher education is form these bubbles of radical leftism there. And anti-Semitism is the glue that holds all these disparate ideologies together. Things such as critical race theory, anti-racism, DEI, all these things are on the left, and they might seem like they don't have that much overlap with one another. But when you talk to people who support those individual platforms or ideologies, you will see that what they have in common is the same thread of anti-Semitism that connects them and connects their passions, and it focuses all of them to hate Israel. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I'm fascinated by this because I was going to say let's get even more granular, because if they were really trying to find a way of having all people come together, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, rather than having all these theories that they're espousing, which causes more division, they would actually be able to have a seat at the table of brotherhood and discuss the common good and the common ground that gives us our hope for being America, one America.
You're absolutely right, and what you're just describing there is the process of assimilation, which has been the best process for American Jews and every other immigrant community in this country. And that's why we have a lot of minority communities that are thriving, is because they've embraced assimilation principles. Now, if you want to look at the radicals on campus who reject assimilation and want a radical form of multiculturalism, all you have to do is look to Europe. As bad as it is in America, the anti-Semitism that is on the streets in European cities right now is far worse than anything we've seen in America. So what the torches, the fires, the chanting, the mobs we're seeing in London, for example, in Sydney and Melbourne, where they're calling for the killing of Jews, that is the logical, and that's the endpoint of what people on campus want. So it's assimilation that would, bring them together with everyone else in the country, and but it also is what's keeping Jews safer here than they are in Europe or in Australia.
Wow, Zachary, you're right. What's happening overseas is really alarming, but it also says to me that we can get control of this in America if we go back to our Judeo-Christian principles, which was initiated for the founding of this country. Have we gone beyond that? Do we still have the ability to come back to that? I mean, you're the editor-in-chief of Campus Reform. You're also part of the Leadership Institute. We've seen horrific incidents on our college campuses with regard to anti-Semitism, but are we beyond the brink that we can't come back to get it right?
I think higher education needs to be reformed from the outside, and a lot of its current practices need to be frankly demolished, and it has to be restored. So I think restoration is the way forward there, and we're seeing that happen on many fronts that are working. We are seeing, mega donors at Harvard, at UPenn. Bill Ackman is maybe the most visible donor doing this. They're pulling their checkbooks and saying, we're not going to donate to schools that are, support anti-Semitism. Harvard lost $1 billion in a matter of weeks over its mishandling of anti-Semitism on that campus. And now schools like Harvard and UPenn are creating anti-Semitism task forces, which are extremely flawed, but doing something is a policy change from their previous policy, which was doing nothing. In Florida, we're seeing Governor Ron DeSantis, spearhead legislation that cracks down on DEI programming and spending. And as Campus Reform just reported the other day, University of Florida just fired all of its DEI offices and staff to be compliant with that law. So getting rid of DEI, getting rid of CRT, anti-racism from, things that can be discussed in graduate seminars and, to expose students that these things exist, to keep it there and remove those things from the first year curriculum where they're told you have to think this way or else, or you have to espouse these principles or else. That's the way to fix the institution of higher education for not just for Jewish students, but for everyone. So no matter what you think, believe, or look like, you're treated the same and not based on fake hierarchy of oppression.
So talk to me about the Department of Education and its role in investigating various schools for failing to protect their Jewish students under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act.
Yep. So Title VI of the Civil Rights Act is a component of that legislation from the 1960s that says any institution that receives federal aid cannot enable actively or passively, for lack of a better term, discrimination against people based on ethnicity, national origin, or race. And so what has been happening in waves since October 7th is the Department of Education is now investigating universities that are either mishandling or they are failing to protect Jewish students who are the targets of anti-Semitic discrimination. I have filed 33 complaints in the last 4 months against universities that I've seen through campus reform reporting doing one of those things where they are choosing not to do anything because they don't care, or they are trying to do something that is basically a botched PR move. I'm glad that of those 33 complaints, it's turned into 11 investigations, and I'm hoping that this holds universities accountable. If nothing else, I want to annoy university administrators into doing the right thing. They have proven over and over again that they just do not care about Jews. Let's be honest about that. So if you don't actually care about doing your job for Jewish students and faculty, I can, and we can as a country, at least annoy you and pester you into doing the right thing, if only just for that.
Look, I thank you for coming on the program. Please don't make this your last time. Keep us updated with what's going on with regard to campus reform and the Leadership Institute. Before I let you go, the Leadership Institute, where did leadership go wrong in America?
That's a great question. I think you have to look at the disconnect between the haves and the have-nots in this country. I think the leaders in this country have totally forgotten about this country's working class. And you can see that they're extending more protections and resources to illegal immigrants now than they are to the most vulnerable in our country. So it's become a classic case of, I think, greed and short-sightedness.
I would have to add to that, my friend, that I also think that in addition to the short-sightedness and the greed, is that forgotten word of service, servant leadership, so important. And you're exemplifying that with campus reform. Zachary Marschall, what's your hope for America?
Thanks. My hope for America is that we get rid of the leftist craze and the leftist DEI obsession we've saw the last few years. I think it happened when Americans were bored and gullible during COVID, and I think they're starting to wake up to reality, and hopefully the pendulum will swing back the other way to sanity. So all I hope for is sanity and normalcy.
Stop the insanity. Oh, my friend, thank you so much. Dr. Zachary Marschall, I appreciate you being on the program, and again, thank you for what you're doing with campus reform.
Thank you for having me.
We're coming back with more after this. Welcome back to America's Hope. I'd like to thank our guests who appeared on tonight's program, and certainly they are